Brand new day, Michael Patrick Shiels, and a brand new state with new members of the House and Senate and a brand new governor. But we welcome back to the program State Senator Jim Runestad, the Republican from White Lake. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, Michael. Good to be on with you.
When you have term limits, as we do you already think about what you're going to do after you're out of office?
Well, we have the shortest term limits in the nation, and people are always thinking, after they did the work to become an elected official, and now the time is up, and what is their next move? So that's very common.
Yeah, I would think so. And, you're not quite ready. Maybe you're very useful and very valuable around the Capitol, obviously, and you've got connections, and you've got people, and you've got relationships, and so maybe you want to stick around in a certain sort of way. And I read this morning, and we're going to talk with him, too, that Tom Leonard has announced he's opened up a shingle called MI Strategies, LLC. He was the House Speaker, and his number one client is going to be Quicken Loans Chair Dan Gilbert. And I guess the two of them are going to collaborate on changing the auto no-fault system, because that's something Tom Leonard wanted to do in office, and it's something Dan Gilbert wants to do. And so now, instead of him as Speaker, he'll be spending Dan Gilbert's money, I guess, to make that happen. How does that sit with you?
Well, I'm not sure in Tom's case whether he is consulting or lobbying. That wasn't clear in anything I've read, and there's a difference if he's sitting down with Dan Gilbert and saying, here's what I would recommend you do, versus using and leveraging relationships individually as a lobbyist to go in and try to persuade the representatives and senators to vote one way or the other. That I'm not sure in terms of that article I read, but in general,
that's a pretty gray line, isn't it?
Well, I would not say it is. If you're meeting with somebody and you're saying, here's what I recommend that you do, anyone ought to be able to do that. It has nothing to do with your leveraging of relationships from the legislature, where you're going in and saying, hey, we had this relationship, and based on that, I would like you to, do thus and such. It's a different category altogether, because one, you're basically using your leverage with individuals. The other one, you're just saying, hey, here's what I recommend a strategy be for you to do. So there, in those two cases, I would say there is a difference. My concern was that an individual would have an ability, and it could be perception only, but an ability to have an influence on legislation, particularly as a chair, but also as a legislator, before they leave the legislature, to fast-track a bill, hold up a bill, before going to work in an industry that they oversaw. And certainly the perception of the public would be that that is wrong, and there's virtually no way to know for sure if that was done or not. So my bill would basically prevent that from happening, because as a legislator, you'd have to wait 2 years after you leave the legislature to become a lobbyist and going and lobbying those individuals. And also as a chair, your usefulness to that industry would be vastly diminished, because you'd have to wait 3 years after you've left the legislature in order to go in and start lobbying these fellow legislators. In Michigan, a third of the legislature in the House is gone every 2 years, and a third is coming in new. So after 3 years, your influence is vastly, vastly diminished in terms of leveraging those relationships, and that was my goal.
So if the widget company says to Representative so-and-so, if you help us get this passed, or, when you're done, we have a nice spot for you here, that sort of direct quid pro quo?
It could be as much as we really appreciate the fine work you've done, and we've really recognized, and, we need people like you, or, there's a million ways of nuancing that suggestion that I think is a problem for the voters here in the state of Michigan, when they simply don't know what's going on behind the curtain. And my bill is to prevent even the appearance of that, because a lot of legislators, you could chair a very big oversight committee overseeing a whole industry, a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the next day you go to work for that industry. And we were voted as the lowest in transparency of all 50 states for, being open and transparent. And so I think this is the kind of bill that will give the populace, the voting people, the assurance that this hanky-panky is going to be very hard to pull off if you have this cooling off period.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator. Keep us up to date, if you would. Senator Jim Runestad.